He said it's a deal breaker if I go on that trip. I went anyway, and posted a bikini pic, my guy Bestie. Lila Harper had always been the type of woman who played by the rules. At 29, she lived in a modest yet tastefully decorated apartment in Boston's upscale Beacon Hill neighborhood, a place that reflected both her career as an interior designer and her husband Evan Carter's obsession with appearances. The apartment was a blend of modern minimalism and cozy charm. Much like Lila herself, she was known for her quiet confidence and sharp eye for detail, traits that made her sought after in her field, but often overshadowed by Evan's larger-than-life personality. Evan, a high-powered attorney with a penchant for perfection, thrived on control, both professionally and personally. To him, life was about maintaining an impeccable image, and his marriage to Lila was no exception. Their relationship, at least on the surface, seemed picture-perfect. Two successful professionals, navigating life together in one of America's most prestigious cities. But beneath the polished veneer lay cracks neither of them dared to acknowledge fully. The tension reached its peak when Lila announced her plans to join her longtime best friend, Ryan Callahan, on a weekend getaway to Cape Cod. It wasn't just any trip. It was something they'd talked about for years, a chance to reconnect after months of busy schedules pulling them in opposite directions. For Lila, it was more than just a vacation. It was freedom. Freedom from Evan's constant demands, from the pressure to maintain their perfect facade, from the suffocating routine that had begun to feel less like a partnership and more like a performance. But Evan didn't see it that way. When Lila casually mentioned the trip over dinner one evening, he froze mid-bite, his fork clinking against the plate as he set it down deliberately. His voice, calm, but laced with warning, cut through the silence. "You're not seriously considering this," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "It's just a couple of days," Lila replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Ryan and I haven't seen each other in ages. We've been planning this forever." Evan leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "Forever? Really? Because it sounds like you're prioritizing someone else over your own husband." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before delivering the ultimatum. "If you go on this trip, Lila, consider it a deal breaker." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. Lila felt her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her wanted to argue, to remind him how unfair his demand was. But another part, the part that had spent years tiptoeing around Evan's expectations, hesitated. Was she really willing to risk everything they'd built for a few days away? That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Lila wrestled with her thoughts. Memories of happier times flooded her mind. Late-night conversations with Ryan during college, road trips fueled by cheap coffee and laughter, the unwavering support he'd offered when she doubted herself. Their friendship had always been a safe haven, a constant in her life even before Evan entered the picture. And now, Evan was asking her to choose between her husband and her oldest confidant. By morning, Lila had made up her mind. As much as she loved Evan, or thought she did, she couldn't let fear dictate her decisions anymore. She packed her bags quietly, leaving a note on the kitchen counter explaining her choice. Her hands trembled as she wrote the final sentence. "I need this. Please try to understand." As she stepped out of the apartment building into the crisp, autumn air, Lila felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. This was uncharted territory for her, a bold step toward reclaiming a piece of herself she feared she'd lost. Little did she know, the consequences of her decision would ripple far beyond what she could have imagined. The drive to Cape Cod was a blur of golden sunlight and the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt. Lila rolled down the window, letting the salty ocean breeze tousle her hair as she followed the GPS directions to the quaint beach house Ryan had rented for the weekend. For the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, unburdened by Evan's watchful eyes or the pressure to maintain their carefully curated image. When she arrived, Ryan was already there, standing barefoot on the porch with a grin that could light up the grayest of days. His easygoing demeanor had always been a stark contrast to Evan's intensity, and right now, it felt like a lifeline. "You made it," he called out, waving enthusiastically as she parked the car. "I did," Lila replied, stepping out and stretching her arms above her head. She hesitated for a moment, half expecting guilt to creep in, but instead, she felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. "I wasn't sure I would." Ryan tilted his head, studying her expression. "Hey, no second-guessing allowed this weekend. We're here to unwind, okay? No drama, no stress, just us in the ocean." Lila nodded, forcing a smile. "Deal." The next few hours were a whirlwind of unpacking, laughter, and reminiscing about old times. They wandered along the shoreline, collecting seashells and skipping stones across the waves. Ryan teased her about how bad she'd gotten at skipping stones since college, and Lila retaliated by splashing water at him, giggling like they were teenagers again. It was exactly the kind of carefree connection she'd been craving, a reminder of who she used to be before life became a series of compromises. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they settled onto the sand with a bottle of wine and a playlist of nostalgic songs. The conversation turned reflective, drifting toward topics they rarely discussed anymore. Dreams they'd once had, fears they'd tucked away, and how adulthood had changed them in ways they hadn't anticipated. "You ever feel like life just sort of happens to you?" Lila asked, swirling the last sip of wine in her glass. "Like, one day you're chasing your passions and the next, you're stuck playing a role someone else wrote for you?" Ryan looked at her thoughtfully. "All the time. But hey, maybe that's why weekends like this are important. To remind ourselves we're still the same people we were back then, the ones who didn't need permission to be happy." His words lingered in her mind long after the fire they'd built on the beach burned down to embers. As they headed back to the house, Lila grabbed her phone and snapped a selfie with Ryan against the backdrop of the moonlit ocean. Both of them were smiling, their faces glowing under the soft light. On impulse, she posted the photo to Instagram, with the caption, "Sometimes you just need to break free." Within minutes, the notifications started pouring in, likes, comments, hearts flooding her screen. Most were supportive, friends praising her adventurous spirit or joking about how jealous they were of her getaway. But amid the positivity, a few comments stood out, sharp and probing. One read, "Still married, huh?" Another questioned whether Evan knew where she was. Lila stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction, hadn't considered how others might interpret the photo. Quickly, she closed the app and shoved her phone into her pocket, trying to shake off the unease creeping over her. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. What would Evan think when he saw the picture? Would he see it as proof of betrayal? As he'd warned? Or worse, would he use it to justify something deeper, something she wasn't ready to confront? As she drifted off to sleep that night, lulled by the sound of crashing waves, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that her decision to come here wasn't just about escaping Evan's ultimatum. It was about testing boundaries, both his and hers, and discovering whether she still had the courage to stand up for herself. The confrontation came the next morning, sharp and unrelenting. Lila had barely slept, her mind racing with questions and emotions she couldn't untangle. When Evan emerged from the bedroom, bleary-eyed and unaware of what she'd discovered, she was already seated at the kitchen counter, his phone lying open in front of her. "Care to explain this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. She slid the phone across the marble surface toward him, the screen still lit with Natalie's messages. Evan froze mid-step, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then his expression hardened. "You went through my phone?" Lila stood up, her hands braced on the counter as she leaned forward. "Don't even try to deflect. This isn't about privacy. It's about honesty, or lack thereof." "How long has this been going on, Evan? Months? Years?" He set the mug down with a thud, exhaling sharply. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Natalie. But it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" Lila repeated incredulously, her voice rising. "You've been sleeping with her while accusing me of being unfaithful, while controlling every move I make. Do you hear yourself right now?" Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "It's complicated, okay? Things between us haven't been right for a long time. You're always so distant, so focused on your career or your friends that you don't even notice when I'm struggling. Natalie, she gets me. She listens. She doesn't treat our marriage like some obligation. So instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat?" Lila shot back, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "That's your solution? To lie and manipulate me into thinking I'm the problem?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Evan muttered, avoiding her gaze. "At first it was just harmless conversations. Then, I don't know, it spiraled out of control." "Harmless?" Lila echoed, shaking her head in disbelief. "There's nothing harmless about betrayal, Evan, nothing. And the worst part is, you used me, my friendship with Ryan, to justify your own guilt. You made me feel like I was the one doing something wrong." The weight of his actions hung heavy in the air, suffocating them both. Evan finally looked at her, his expression a mix of shame and desperation. "I messed up, Lila. I know that, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." "No," Lila interrupted firmly, cutting him off. "We're done. There's no fixing this." Evan stared at her, stunned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm leaving," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. "You broke my trust, Evan. You lied to me, manipulated me, and treated me like I didn't matter. I gave up pieces of myself to keep this marriage together. And for what? So you could throw it all away for someone else?" She turned away before he could respond, heading to the bedroom to pack her things. As she stuffed clothes and essentials into a suitcase, Evan followed her, pleading and apologizing, but she tuned him out. His words felt hollow now, empty promises meant to salvage his pride rather than repair the damage he'd caused. By the time she finished packing, Ryan was already waiting outside in his car. She'd texted him earlier, asking if she could stay with him temporarily, and he'd agreed without hesitation. When she stepped out of the apartment building, dragging her suitcase behind her, Ryan got out of the car and rushed to help. "You okay?" he asked gently, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and tense posture. "I will be," Lila replied, forcing a small smile. "Thanks for letting me crash at your place." "You don't even have to ask," Ryan said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Let's get you settled." As they drove away from the building where she'd spent the last 5 years of her life, Lila felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The pain of Evan's betrayal cut deep, but beneath it was a flicker of hope, a sense that she was finally free to rebuild herself, to rediscover who she was outside the shadow of their toxic relationship. Ryan glanced at her as they merged onto the highway. "Where do you want to go after this?" Lila looked out the window, watching the cityscape blur past. "Somewhere new," she said softly. "Somewhere where I can figure out who I am again." And for the first time in a long time, she believed she might actually find it. The days that followed were a blur of quiet reflection and tentative steps toward healing. Ryan's apartment, though modest compared to the Beacon Hill condo Lila had left behind, became her temporary refuge. A space where she could breathe, freely without judgment or expectation. It wasn't perfect. The guest room was cluttered with boxes of old records and art supplies, but it felt safe. More importantly, it didn't carry the weight of memories tainted by Evan's betrayal. Ryan did his best to support her, balancing acts of kindness with a respectful distance. He cooked meals when she didn't feel like eating, lent her books he thought might inspire her, and simply sat with her in silence when words felt inadequate. One evening, as they shared takeout on the couch, Ryan handed her a sketch pad and a set of colored pencils. "You used to love drawing," he said with an encouraging smile. "Maybe it'll help clear your head." At first, Lila hesitated. She hadn't sketched in years, not since her early days as a designer when creativity flowed effortlessly. But something about the gesture, the gentle nudge to reconnect with a part of herself she'd neglected, felt comforting. That night, she filled page after page with abstract shapes and swirling patterns, each stroke releasing a little more of the tension coiled inside her. During the day, Lila threw herself into work, pouring her emotions into a new design project. Her client, a boutique hotel chain, had given her creative freedom to redesign their lobby spaces. Inspired by her recent trip to Cape Cod and the sense of renewal she was striving for, Lila envisioned airy, coastal-themed interiors infused with warmth and personality. The project reignited her passion for design, reminding her why she'd fallen in love with the craft in the first place. Still, there were moments when the pain resurfaced, sharp, unexpected jolts triggered by mundane things. A text notification would send her heart racing, fearing it might be Evan. Walking past familiar spots in the city where they'd once laughed together brought waves of nostalgia mixed with bitterness. On those nights, sleep eluded her, and she found herself scrolling through old photos, searching for answers she knew wouldn't come. One afternoon, while sorting through some belongings she'd hastily packed, Lila stumbled upon a legal document, tucked away in the bottom of a box. Their prenuptial agreement. She stared at it for a long moment, realizing its significance now. Evan had always insisted on signing it before their wedding, framing it as a practical safeguard rather than a lack of trust. At the time, she'd dismissed it as standard procedure among affluent couples. Now, she saw it for what it truly was. Another layer of control. Another way Evan had ensured he held all the cards. Determined to take back some semblance of power, Lila reached out to a trusted colleague who specialized in family law. Over coffee, she outlined her situation, careful to keep her voice steady, despite the turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. Her colleague listened intently, nodding sympathetically. "You've got grounds for a strong case," she assured Lila. "Given the circumstances, you're entitled to more than just half of the marital assets. And if you play your cards right, we can make sure he doesn't walk away scot-free." The advice gave Lila a renewed sense of purpose. For so long, she'd allowed Evan to dictate the terms of their relationship, bending herself to fit his expectations. Now, she was ready to fight. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. This wasn't just about reclaiming financial stability. It was about asserting her worth and refusing to let him diminish her any further. As weeks turned into months, Lila began to settle into a new rhythm. She leased a small studio apartment downtown, decorating it with pieces that reflected her evolving identity. Gone were the minimalist furnishings Evan had favored. In their place were vibrant colors, eclectic textures, and personal touches that made the space uniquely hers. She also started attending therapy sessions, slowly unpacking the emotional baggage she'd carried throughout her marriage. Each session brought clarity, helping her understand how she'd lost herself in the process of trying to please someone who never truly valued her. Ryan remained a constant presence in her life, offering unwavering support without overstepping boundaries. Their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect and shared history. Though neither of them pursued anything beyond platonic affection, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond strengthened by adversity and trust. By the time fall gave way to winter, Lila felt like a different person. The cracks in her foundation had been painful to confront, but they'd also allowed room for growth. She no longer feared starting over because she realized that rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating something stronger, truer, and infinitely more beautiful. And for the first time in years, she looked forward to whatever came next. The courtroom was quiet, but charged with tension, the kind that made every breath feel deliberate and every word carry weight. Lila sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture calm yet resolute, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and trousers that exuded confidence she hadn't felt in years. Beside her, her attorney flipped through documents with practiced ease, occasionally whispering updates into her ear. Across the aisle, Evan looked pale and uneasy, his usual composure shattered under the scrutiny of the judge and the mounting evidence against him. When it came time for Lila to testify, she rose steadily, her voice clear as she recounted the events leading up to this moment, the ultimatums, the betrayal, the discovery of his affair with Natalie. She spoke not out of anger, but from a place of truth, her words painting a vivid picture of a marriage built on control rather than partnership. Evan's lawyer tried to cast doubt on her narrative, suggesting she had provoked the split by prioritizing friendships over her husband, but Lila remained unshaken. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving him," she said firmly, meeting Evan's gaze for the first time since the trial began. "I left because he stopped respecting me, because he lied, manipulated, and betrayed me. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice." The judge ultimately ruled in Lila's favor, granting her a significant portion of their shared assets along with spousal support. The decision sent shockwaves through Evan's world. Whispers of scandal followed him everywhere, tarnishing the pristine image he'd worked so hard to maintain. Meanwhile, Lila walked away with her dignity intact, knowing she'd fought for what was right. Months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt entirely her own. Her studio apartment buzzed with energy. Plants flourished in sunny corners, artwork adorned the walls, and fresh flowers brought bursts of color to the kitchen counter. It was a space that reflected who she was now, independent, creative, and unapologetically herself. Her career reached new heights as well. The boutique hotel chain loved her coastal-inspired designs so much that they commissioned her for additional projects across the country. With each success, Lila gained not just professional recognition, but also a deeper sense of fulfillment. She no longer sought validation from others. Instead, she celebrated her achievements quietly, savoring the joy they brought without needing applause. Ryan remained a steadfast presence in her life, though their dynamic evolved naturally. They traveled together again, this time exploring the rugged landscapes of Big Sur, California. Days were spent hiking along cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, nights curled up by a campfire sharing stories beneath a starlit sky. Their bond deepened further, rooted in mutual respect and gratitude for having weathered storms side by side. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the horizon in fiery hues, Ryan turned to her with a thoughtful smile. "You know, I think you're finally exactly where you're supposed to be." Lila chuckled softly, leaning back against the hood of their rental car. "Yeah? And where's that?" "Here," he replied simply, gesturing toward the vast expanse before them. "Living your best life, doing what makes you happy. No compromises, no apologies." His words lingered long after they packed up and headed back to the cabin. That night, as she lay awake listening to the distant crash of waves, Lila reflected on how far she'd come. Leaving Evan had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been liberating. For too long, she'd allowed fear to dictate her choices, sacrificing pieces of herself to keep the peace. Now, she embraced freedom, not recklessly, but with intention and purpose. In the months that followed, Lila continued to redefine her boundaries, learning to prioritize her needs while nurturing relationships that uplifted her. Social media posts became less about appearances and more about authenticity. A photo of her latest design project captioned, "Creating spaces that inspire," or a candid shot of her and Ryan laughing over coffee with the tagline, "Grateful for good company." By spring, when cherry blossoms bloomed in Boston Common and the air carried the promise of renewal, Lila found herself standing on the edge of something extraordinary. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The scars of her past would always remain, reminders of lessons learned and battles fought, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more resilient. As she strolled through the park one crisp morning, sunlight warming her face and a gentle breeze tugging at her scarf, Lila smiled to herself. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was hers. Every choice, every challenge, every triumph belonged to her alone. And for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to see what the future held.